It's on. Pursuant to Committee Rule 6F, House Rule 11, Clause 2H4, the chairman may postpone further proceedings to on any question approving any measures or matter or adopting an amendment in which a recorded vote of the yeas and nays is ordered. And I'd ask unanimous consent. The chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's meeting without objection. That is so ordered. All bill and amendment texts have been distributed electronically, and paper copies are also available here in the hearing room. As a reminder, the committee will use an electronic system for any requested recorded votes. Today, the committee is considering H.R. 2390, the Maritime Supply Chain Security Act, H.R. 2351, to direct the Commandant of the Coast Guard to update the policy of Coast Guard regarding the use of medication to treat drug overdose or for other purposes. An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 252, the Secure Our Ports Act 2025, H.R. 2035, the American Cargo for American Ships Act, H.R. 188, the Amtrak Transparency and Accountability for Passengers and Taxpayers Act, H.R. 248, the Baby Changing on Board Act, an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1373, the Tennessee Valley Authority Transparency Act of 2025, H.R. 1948 to authorize the International Boundary and Water Commission to accept funds for activities related to wastewater treatment and flood control works and for other purposes, and an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 137 designating the House Press Gallery, rooms H315, 316, 317, 318, and 319 of the United States Capitol as the Frederick Douglas Press Gallery. Finally, I'd ask unanimous consent for the committee to use an amendments roster for any items under consideration by the committee. Without objection, that is so ordered. Our first item for consideration is H.R. 2390, the Maritime Supply Chain Security Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation from further consideration of H.R. 2390. And without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Introduced by our colleague, Representative Rouser, this bill strengthens the ability of ports to confront potential threats to the United States supply chain posed by Chinese-made cranes and associated software and hardware. Simply put, the bill is going to allow PIDP funds to be used to replace Chinese cranes at our nation's ports, allowing for the replacement of infrastructure supplied by one of our adversaries. I urge all members to support this common sense piece of legislation. I recognize Ranking Member Larson for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And support H.R. 2390 legislation to clarify that funding provided by the PIDP grants can be used to replace or upgrade Chinese-made cranes at ports. The PID program provides grants to projects that improve the safety, the efficiency, and the reliability of the movement of goods at our nation's ports. And since 90% of everything we wear, eat, consume is carried by water, ports are the bedrock of our supply chain. The bipartisan infrastructure law provided $2.25 billion in much-needed advance appropriations for PIDP, and ports around the country are using these dollars. I look forward to working with the majority to ensure that the PIDP maintains robust funding into the future, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation and yield back.
Recognize Representative Larson, bill sponsor. Mr. Rouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the interest of all members today and everybody wanting to get out of town, I'm going to sum it up this way. If you're for China, vote no. If you're for the United States, vote yes. I yield back.
Mr. Ezell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to support H.R. 2390, which was introduced by my colleague and friend from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser. This bill will strengthen the ability of our nation's ports to confront threats posed by the Chinese cranes by clarifying that Port Infrastructure Development Program, PIDP, funds can be used to replace port crane hardware software of Chinese origin. This legislation is one step that we can secure our ports against foreign adversaries. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on the bill? Seeing no one, we now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 2390. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2390 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Next item for consideration is H.R. 2351, a bill to direct the Commandant of the Coast Guard to update the policy of the Coast Guard regarding the use of medication to treat drug overdose and for other purposes. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation from further consideration of H.R. 2351. Without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize myself for a statement. H.R. 2351 was introduced by the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation's Vice Chair, Representative McDowell. The bill strengthens the Coast Guard's ability to go after drug traffickers and to respond to opioid overdoses in various settings and locations. I urge all members to support the bill, and now recognize Ranking Member Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support H.R. 2351 because the health of the women and the men who serve in the Coast Guard is paramount. Members of the Coast Guard face incredible challenges. They perform life or death search and rescue missions. They regularly interdict drugs and migrants at sea, and they break ice in the most difficult environments. Unfortunately, they have not always enjoyed the support that they deserve. They often live in subpar housing, operate out-of-date technology. They don't always receive the best health care. This legislation, which conforms with the Department of Defense policy, ensures that members of the Coast Guard have access to naloxone at all Coast Guard stations and operating environments.
Okay.
H.R. 2351 further allows the Coast Guard to prosecute drug smuggling that occurs with unmanned and remote vessels where an individual may not be on the vessel. So I urge my colleagues to support this legislation and yield back.
McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm proud to speak in support of my bill, H.R. 2351, which amends the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act to equip the U.S. Coast Guard to inspect vessels for illicit drugs and gives the Coast Guard parity with other armed services overdose response capabilities by ensuring that naloxone is available in the event of a worst-case scenario. Last month, 2 Coast Guard cutters intercepted hundreds of millions of dollars of illicit drugs in an unprecedented bust. The Coast Guard's drug interdiction responsibilities will continue to play a key role in protecting our communities from fentanyl and opioid abuse moving forward. Our Coast Guard is the first line of defense against illegal drugs reaching American shores, and this bill ensures that they have what they need to respond swiftly and effectively. It's long overdue that we close the loopholes that traffickers exploit and ensure the Coast Guard has the support it needs. I urge my colleagues to support this crucial legislation, and I yield back.
Ms. Gillen.
Thank you, Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson, for organizing this markup and for advancing these bipartisan measures. I am proud to support H.R. 2351, introduced by my Republican colleague, Representative McDowell of North Carolina, which will help the Coast Guard conduct its critical law enforcement responsibilities and keep our Coast Guardsmen safe. I'm so proud that the 4th Congressional District of New York is home to Coast Guard Station Jones Beach, which is responsible for Coast Guard operations on the south shore of Long Island, inland waters, and I'm deeply grateful to these men and women who are serving our country and for the critical role that they play in conducting search and rescue, law enforcement missions, and part of the Long Island Sound Coast Guard sector. This bill will help Coast Guard do more to stop the flow of illicit drugs, fentanyl, and into our communities. Mr. Chairman, as you know, the epidemic of illicit fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances has ravaged countless communities across our country. Families throughout my district have experienced unimaginable pain and suffering from losing their loved ones due to this deadly drug. A family in my district just a year ago dropped off their precious child to college and went back shortly thereafter to pick up their child's body because of fentanyl. We must get fentanyl off our streets and away from our kids. This crisis has killed Americans of every age, every background, and every walk of life. A single ounce of fentanyl can have a devastating effect upon a community. It's time we take on the cartels and hold traffickers accountable. Unfortunately, current law limits the Coast Guard's ability to go after bad actors by requiring that drug smugglers be on board a vessel while a crime is committed. This hinders the Coast Guard's ability to go after operators of unmanned or autonomous vessels or criminals who stow drugs on ships without the knowledge of the crew. This common sense legislation will clarify that the focus should be on the location of the crime regardless of the location of the criminal. Put simply, this bill will allow the Coast Guard to go after the criminals, save lives, and keep our communities safe. This bill will also require the Coast Guard to make naloxone and other similar medication available on all Coast Guard installations, including Station Jones Beach, and in all operational environments, enabling the Coast Guard to treat any opioid and fentanyl overdoses that they encounter. Mr. Chairman, I encourage all of my colleagues to join me in supporting this important bipartisan legislation to help the Coast Guard do their jobs. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Ezell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to support H.R. 2351, which was introduced by my colleague from North Carolina, Mr. McDowell. The bill will strengthen the Coast Guard's ability to go after drug traffickers by clarifying authority to prosecute cases involving unmanned or autonomous vessels, as well as instances where drugs have been hidden aboard a vessel without the crew's knowledge. This bill will also strengthen the service's ability to respond to opioid overdoses by requiring the availability of naloxone on Coast Guard bases, aboard cutters, and other operational environments. These common sense reforms will help the Coast Guard as it conducts drug interdiction operations. Thank you for offering the bill, Mr. McDowell. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back my time.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on the bill? Seeing no one, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption of favorable reporting of H.R. 2351. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2351 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 252, the Secure Our Ports Act of 2025. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation from further consideration of H.R. 252, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize Mr. Ezell to offer his amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 252, offered by Mr. Ezell of Mississippi.
Without
Thank you,
objection,
Mr.
the
Chairman.
amendment in the nature of substitute is going to be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purpose of further amendment. I now recognize Mr. Ezell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to support H.R. 252, which was introduced by my colleague from California, Mr. Calvert. The bill simply prohibits Chinese, Russian, North Korea, or Iranian state-owned enterprises or an entity with any percent ownership of those countries from entering into contracts for the ownership, leasing, or operations of U.S. port facilities that are subject to security plans. I think we can all agree that it would be in our best interest for those countries not to operate port terminals in this country. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back my time.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the importance of a resilient supply chain as port congestion and vessel backlogs disrupted the free flow of commerce. H.R. 252, the Secure Our Ports Act, works to minimize interference in U.S. ports from foreign adversaries. As ranking member of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, I am proud to have worked with my colleagues and former President Biden to invest $2.5 billion in port infrastructure development through the bipartisan infrastructure law. We all now understand the importance of a strong, resilient supply chain, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure robust funding for the maritime industry. For this reason, I will vote yes on this bill. I yield back.
Do any other members wish to be heard on the bill or on the amendment? Seeing none, are there any other amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 252? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 252. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and then the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 252 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 252 as amended is agreed to and ordered favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 2035, the American Cargo for American Ships Act. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation from further consideration of H.R. 2035. And without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize myself for a statement. H.R. 2035 was introduced by the Coast Guard Maritime Transportation Subcommittee's ranking member, Representative Carbajal, along with the subcommittee's chairman, Representative Vizell. This bill requires the Department of Transportation to increase its cargo preference requirement to 100%, making the department a leader in supporting the domestic maritime sector. And I'd urge support for the legislation. And now recognize Ranking Member Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support H.R. 2035 because the U.S. flag maritime fleet is at a critical juncture, and now is the time that we act. Currently, there are around 80 American ships participating in the international transportation of waterborne commerce. As a result, we have become dependent on foreign flagged vessels to carry our commerce. This bill guarantees U.S. vessels will have U.S. cargo to transport, which will bolster the strength of the industry, and in the long term, the number of ships flying the U.S. flag. Now, while the Department of Defense is currently required to ship 100% of its cargo on U.S. flagged vessels, the Department of Transportation and the Maritime Administration, the agency tasked with promoting the U.S. maritime industry, are only required to ship 50% of their cargo on U.S. flagged ships. This bill rectifies that difference. If it's good enough for the DoD, it's good enough for the DOT. And I appreciate Ranking Member Carbajal's leadership on this issue and urge my colleagues to support this legislation. With that, I yield back.
I now recognize Representative Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to express my support for my bill, H.R. 2035, the American Ships for American Cargo Act. I would also like to thank Chair Ezell for co-sponsoring this important piece of legislation, highlighting the bipartisan nature of maritime commerce and the need to grow the industry. In recent years, our U.S. flag fleet has shrunk to an unacceptable small size. As ranking member of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, I and other stakeholders have been championing the need to grow the fleet, and now is the time to act. My bill strengthens the American merchant marine by guaranteeing that 100% of U.S. cargo shipped by the Department of Transportation will be transported on U.S. flagged ships. It is that simple. This bill is the maritime industry's version of Buy America. Cargo preference laws exist to maintain our robust American shipping capability and to ensure that federal dollars are being invested back into the American workforce. Not only is this a bipartisan effort, but the maritime industry is wholly supportive. 14 industry partners have provided support for this bill, including labor unions, shipping companies, and trade associations. I am optimistic that this bill will grow the U.S. merchant marine and strengthen our national security, and I look forward to it becoming law. I yield back.
I now recognize Representative Zell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to support H.R. 2035 as an original co-sponsor to the legislation introduced by my colleague from California, Mr. Carbajal. H.R. 2035 will strengthen the U.S. maritime industry by requiring that 100% of cargo procured, furnished, or financed by the Department of Transportation be transported by owned U.S. fleet, privately operated commercial vessels. Our aim here is to reduce our reliance on foreign-owned vessels and crew and build up our maritime base here at home, strengthening our national security. I thank Representative Carbajal and urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back my time.
Does any other members wish to be heard on the bill? Seeing none, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 2035. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2035 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 188, the Amtrak Transparency and Accountability for Passengers and Taxpayers Act. And I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials from further consideration of H.R. 188. Without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I recognize myself for opening statement. H.R. 188, the Amtrak Transparency and Accountability for Passengers and Taxpayers Act, establishes some necessary transparency standards for the Amtrak Board of Directors. The bill applies the open meetings requirement under the Government in the Sunshine Act, providing exceptions for contract negotiations, collective bargaining agreements, and matters of employment. H.R. 188 holds Amtrak to the same standards as other executive branch agencies and provides some long overdue transparency to the taxpayers. Last Congress, the legislation favorably reported from this committee and passed the House under suspension of the rules, and I'm proud to support 188 and urge my colleagues to do the same. I now recognize Ranking Member Larson.
Thank you, Chair. I support H.R. 188. This bill, which passed the House on suspension last Congress, requires the Amtrak's Board of Directors to hold open meetings. The legislation requires the public is notified of all upcoming meetings and is allowed to observe board meetings. The bill increases transparency and allows some exceptions when certain contractual obligations are discussed, including contract negotiations with Amtrak's workers. However, Amtrak has identified additional instances where sensitive or confidential business information may come up at board meetings that are not protected under this legislation, so I support improvements to address these concerns. I look forward to the chair as this legislation moves forward. With that, I yield back.
Now recognize Representative Webster.
Thank you, Chair. It's been said more than once that sunshine's the best disinfectant. Transparency is important to the democratic government. It helps keep the people informed and the actions being taken in their name. While Amtrak was intended to operate as a private, nonprofit business, its current structure makes it a government entity. Additionally, in recent rulings, the courts have found Amtrak to be a government entity. This bill simply ensures that Amtrak is subject to the same level of transparency as other government agencies. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Yield back.
Any other members wish to be heard on the bill? Seeing no one, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, while I appreciate the stated goal of promoting greater transparency, I'm concerned that this bill could undermine the progress Amtrak has made to increase transparency and disrupt the bipartisan momentum of Amtrak's board. The board, confirmed with bipartisan support last year, comprises both Democrats and Republicans who were just sworn in 3 months ago. They deserve time and space to collaborate effectively without premature changes to their structure and operations. It's also important to acknowledge the transparency work Amtrak has already undertaken. The board is committed to making portions of its meetings public, sharing redacted minutes and resolutions, and engaging with stakeholders nationwide. These are promising steps, and I believe this committee should continue to encourage that progress, not complicate it with new mandates that aren't typically applied to other federally chartered institutions. The timing of this bill also raises concerns. With the next surface transportation reauthorization on the horizon, we'll soon have an opportunity to revisit Amtrak's governance and funding in a more comprehensive manner after providing this board time to implement reforms. Moving this bill forward now may limit the full deliberation these issues deserve. Finally, while I believe there's room for healthy debate on the future of Amtrak, it's hard to ignore the broader context. Republican proposals to significantly reduce Amtrak's funding by over $1 billion in the House Republicans' proposed fiscal year 2025 Transportation HUD Appropriations Bill and calls by some Republicans to privatize it altogether send a conflicting message to Americans on where Republicans stand on Amtrak. Amtrak service, especially along the Northeast Corridor, is essential to my constituents who rightly expect it to be maintained and improved, not weakened. I remain committed to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to ensure that Amtrak remains safe, efficient, and accountable to the American people. However, I respectfully believe we can do better than this bill in its current form. I plan to vote no on final passage if this bill receives a recorded vote, and I encourage others to carefully consider the broader implications before moving forward. I yield back.
Do any other members wish to be heard on the bill? Seeing no one, we're now considering the bill for amendments. What purpose is Ms. Titus? Seek recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Please designate.
An amendment to H.R. 188 offered by Ms. Titus of Nevada, number 007.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment allows Amtrak to go into executive session for confidential commercial discussions and when the safety of Amtrak customers or employees are at risk. Amtrak's police department has over 500 sworn and civilian personnel who conduct a range of behind-the-scenes and frontline security measures to ensure Amtrak employees and customers are safe. These officers partner with federal, state, and local rail and transit law enforcement agencies in the communities that Amtrak serves. The Amtrak board needs to be aware of and have input into these activities. My amendment ensures that in sensitive discussions about security measures to keep riders safe, such as the number of officers on board a specific train or potential security vulnerabilities, are not revealed to potential bad actors. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, this committee made historic investments in passenger rail, and we're seeing the impacts of this already in my district in Las Vegas. Thanks to a $3 billion federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail grant, Brightline West began construction last April on this project. Across the United States, current and future rail passengers are seeing the benefits of the BIL's investments. With this funding comes a need for additional transparency, which is why I support this bill. We also need to fully fund Amtrak, as you just heard my colleagues say, so that we don't go back on the progress that we've been making over the past 5 years. There's not a passenger rail system in the world that operates without some government investment in capital projects. I appreciate Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and Representative Nell's work to increase transparency and to support passenger rail. I believe the discussion on funding and transparency is best suited for the upcoming surface transportation authorization, but I support this bill and urge my colleagues to support the amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Do any other members wish to be heard on the amendment? Seeing none, I recognize myself real quick. I do support this amendment. It allows for the bill's underlying goals of increasing transparency to be achieved, and while making clarifications to ensure information that could compromise passenger safety or confidential commercial information is not disclosed. I'd urge my colleagues to support the amendment. With that, I yield back. Does anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. We'll now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption favorable reporting of H.R. 188 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 188 as amended is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Next item for consideration is H.R. 248, the Baby Changing on Board Act, and I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials from further consideration of H.R. 248, and without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Recognize myself real quick for a statement. H.R. 248, the Baby Changing on Board Act, is effective bipartisan legislation that's intended to help parents better care for their young children by requiring baby changing tables on board Amtrak-owned trains. And I very much appreciate my colleagues' work on this legislation. Last Congress, the legislation was reported favorably from the committee by unanimous consent, and I urge adoption today by the committee. I now recognize Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the Baby Changing on Board Act introduced by Representatives Underwood and Van Drew. This bill requires Amtrak to install baby changing stations and accessible bathrooms on new passenger rail cars and include clear signage indicating their availability. I'm pleased we can support this legislation and make traveling by Amtrak more accessible for parents and caregivers traveling with young children. So I urge all members to support this bill, and I yield back.
Representative Webster.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. My colleague from Illinois introduced this very good amendment, and I think that there should be baby changing abilities on any kind of Amtrak train. So it's bipartisan, is overdue for a long time. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Reel back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on the legislation? Seeing no one, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on adoption and favorably reporting of H.R. 248. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 248 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 1373, the Tennessee Valley Authority Transparency Act of 2025. And I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment from further consideration of H.R. 1373. And without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered read and open for amendment at any point. I'd recognize Mr. McDowell to offer his amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I'm offering an amendment in the nature of the substitute on behalf of Mr. Burchett, and the amendment's at the desk.
Clerk, please designate.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1373, offered by Mr. McDowell of North Carolina.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as a base text for the purpose of further amendment. I recognize Mr. McDowell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The TVA is a government-chartered power company operating in Tennessee and 6 surrounding states, including part of my home state in North Carolina. Millions of people rely on the TVA's services and deserve to know how the company operates. On Monday, TVA appointed a new CEO without consideration from the public or members of Congress, despite the TVA's CEO being the highest paid federal employee in the country. The TVA Transparency Act is simple. It requires Tennessee Valley Authority meetings to be open to the public and requires 7 days' notice online for future meetings. It is important for Congress to continue delivering on our commitment to improve transparency, efficiency, and accountability. I will be supporting this legislation, which was introduced by Representatives Tim Burchett and Steve Cohen, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield back.
Recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the ANS to H.R. 1373, a bipartisan bill to promote additional transparency at board meetings at the TVA. I want to thank Representatives Cohen and Burchett of Tennessee for their leadership on this bill and their tireless work to improve the TVA. The TVA is the nation's largest government-owned wholesale power producer, supplying power to 10 million people across 7 states. This legislation requires TVA's board meetings to be publicly available when possible, which will increase transparency for the communities impacted by the board's decision. I support the ANS to H.R. 1373 and encourage my colleagues to do the same. With that, yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? I would like to commend Congressman Burchett and Cohen for their continued work to make the Tennessee Valley Authority transparent for all of its customers. With that, are there any other amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to 1373? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1373. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorably reporting of H.R. 1373 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1373 as amended is agreed to and ordered favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 1948, a bill to authorize the International Boundary and Water Commission to accept funds for activities relating to wastewater treatment and flood control works and for other purposes. And I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment from further consideration of H.R. 1948. And without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now considered read and open for amendment at any point. Recognize myself real quick. H.R. 1948 would allow the United States section of the International Boundary and Water Commission, or the IBWC, to receive additional funding from other federal and non-federal partners to support water and wastewater infrastructure. The IBWC is already authorized to receive funds from the Environmental Protection Agency and will be allowed, and this bill will allow the IBWC to partner with other entities to address the maintenance backlog for critical water infrastructure. This bill will give the IBWC another tool to help address water infrastructure issues in its service area. I urge colleagues to support it, and I now recognize Ranking Member Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this legislation to assist the U.S. section of the International Boundary and Water Commission, the IBWC, in carrying out its critical water-related missions. This bill, which passed this committee last Congress with bipartisan support, provided the IBWC with the authority to accept contributed funds from other federal and state agencies. This authority, which most other federal infrastructure agencies already possess, will allow the IBWC to partner with other federal agencies and non-federal interests to carry out critical water-related projects, including projects for wastewater treatment, water conservation, and flood control. I support the legislation and urge my colleagues to do the same. With that, I yield back.
Do any other members wish to be heard on the legislation? Seeing no one, we will now proceed to final passage of the legislation. The question is now on the adoption and favorable reporting of H.R. 1948. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1948 is agreed to and will be favorably reported to the House. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is House Resolution 137, designating the House Press Gallery rooms H315, H316, H317, H318, and H319 of the United States Capitol as the Frederick Douglas Press Gallery. I'd ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management from further consideration of House Resolution 137. Without objection, that is so ordered. I now call up the bill for consideration. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill is now considered read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Mr. Owens to offer his amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
Clerk, please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.Res. 137, offered by Mr. Owens of Utah.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered read and shall be considered as base text for the purpose of further amendment. And I now recognize Mr. Owens for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we honor a man whose life story embodies the American dream, a dream built on grit, faith, and refusal to accept anything less than freedom. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. He had no inheritance, no powerful connections, and no roadmap to success. He had instead a relentless will for freedom, to own his own mind, his voice, and ultimately his future. He taught himself to read and write. He defied a system that told him he wasn't meant to think, speak, or lead. He didn't just free himself, he spent the rest of his life fighting for those others to do the same. This is the America that we know of. This is the honor. This is the honor we give them today. In 1871, Frederick Douglass walked these halls not as a lawmaker, but as the first black member of the Congressional Press Galleries, reporting on the work of this very institution during the Reconstruction. He understood that freedom required not just laws, but knowledge and truth. more than 150 years ago, we have the opportunity to ensure that Douglas' legacy isn't just remembered in history books, but permanently embedded within these halls. My amendment formally designates the U.S. House of Representatives Press Gallery as a Frederick Douglass Press Gallery, a lasting tribute to a man who ensured the truth was told. This isn't a Republican or Democrat effort, it's an American one. I'm honored to co-lead this bipartisan initiative alongside my colleagues and representatives Byron Donalds, Andre Carlson, Stephen Halsford, Wesley Hunt, and John James. At a time when so many are quick to divide us, let this be something that unites us, a recognition that no matter where we come from, our country is one that's at its best when we honor those who have fought to make it better. Frederick Douglass didn't just escape slavery, he transformed this nation with his words, his courage, his conviction that all men and women should be free. It is only right that we honor him today in this very place that he made history. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. I seek recognition in support of the amendment to H.R. 137. It's been a pleasure to work with my T&I colleague, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens, to help advance the bill through our markup today. We are both original co-sponsors of this resolution. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds. H.R. 137 will rename the House Press Gallery for an amazing American, Frederick Douglass. Many know Mr. Douglass as an abolitionist and an orator. Formerly enslaved, he emancipated himself. Yet many don't know Douglass as a journalist. First working with William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator. And then he founded and published his own newspaper, The North Star. The title recognized the way so many former slaves found liberation by following the North Star. After the Civil War, Douglass published other newspapers like the New National Era, a black weekly newspaper. Douglass and his sons covered Congress for this publication. Frederick Douglass was the first black man to report on Congress and be allowed into the Capitol Press Gallery, where he was a member from 1871 to 1875. He covered the critical debates in Congress during Reconstruction, following the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. There is a plaque and a painting of Mr. Douglass in the National Press Gallery, or in the Press Gallery. But it's past time for a permanent recognition of the groundbreaking and legendary work by renaming the House Press Gallery the Frederick Douglass Press Gallery. Mr. Chairman, I urge all of my colleagues to join us and Mr. Owens in supporting passage of the resolution. Thank you, and I yield back.
And the members wish to be heard. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of substitute to House Resolution 137? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to House Resolution 137. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is now on adoption and favorable reporting of Resolution 137 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And House Resolution 137 as amended is agreed to and ordered favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Since all of the legislation this morning was passed by voice vote, we're going to conclude the markup, and I want to thank everybody for sticking around for the markup. Mr. Larson.
Yeah, just a quick moment to speak out of turn. I want to thank all the members for coming this morning with the schedule change, and I want to thank the chair for moving the markup an hour so we could accommodate schedules, travel, or otherwise. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Yield back.
With that, I'd ask unanimous consent that each measure ordered reported today be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating any amendments adopted without objection. That is so ordered. I'd ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, and conforming changes to each of the measures ordered reported today to reflect the actions of the committee. Without objection, that is so ordered. Pursuant to House Rule 22, Clause 1, I'd ask unanimous consent that the chairman or his designee be authorized to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the legislation adopted today and any similar measure. Without objection, that is so ordered. I'd ask unanimous consent that the chairman have consultation after consultation with the ranking member, have authority to strike or revise any provision of the measures ordered reported today that would cause a sequential referral to another committee or that would cause the bill to be subject to Budget Act or Rule 21, cut-go, point of order. Without objection, that is so ordered. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, I'd ask unanimous consent that all members of the committee have at least 2 calendar days in which to file any supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views on the legislation adopted today. Without objection, that is so ordered. Pursuant to Rule 6 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, I note the presence of quorum for all actions taken on all committee business today. And with that, everybody enjoy your weekend. The Committee on Transportation Infrastructure has completed its business. Committee stands adjourned.